As Jill mentioned, Daniel Mccarthy is my name. I'm the head of unit at the SRB, in charge of the teams responsible for preparing resolution plans for the banks here in Belgium and also in the Netherlands. Sorry, in the Netherlands and also here in Belgium. I'm normally in Belgium. On top of that, I'm also responsible for a number of policy areas within the SRB. And before moving into the discussion on making resolvability a BAU process, which is the topic of the discussion this morning, I'll briefly outline the context from where the public authorities are coming from relative to this new discipline and world of resolution. As we've been hearing throughout the conference this week, this year marks the 10-year anniversary of the financial crisis in 2007. And back in 2007, at the start of the crisis, and in the absence of a credible and feasible framework for resolving failing banks, the authorities had little option but to bail out most of the banks apart from Lehman's. And in the EU, that took a number of different forms. Direct recapitalisation aid of €465 billion, a further €190 billion of state aid in the form of premium payments on the transfer value of troubled assets above their market value, and guarantees exceeding €1.1 trillion, with liquidity arrangements coming on top of these figures. Since then, the banks and the regulatory system has and continues to undergo significant change. These include increases and changes in the calculation of capital and liquidity requirements and buffers, a movement towards centrally cleared counterparties, the introduction of a new recovery and resolution regime through the BORD, and the establishment of new institutional arrangements in the Eurozone with the creation of the Single Supervisory Mechanism in November 2014 and the Single Resolution Mechanism in 2015, assuming full responsibilities on the 1st of January 2016. The SRB is directly responsible for the resolution planning of 130 banks, including cross-border, less significant institutions within the Eurozone. And in its first year of operation, the SRB, along with the national resolution authorities, prepared two types of plans. Phase 2, so-called Phase 2 resolution plans endorsed by the Extended Executive Board, and transitional resolution plans, a basic foundation plan used to inform the development of a resolution plan that will be adopted in the subsequent year, along with organising 8 crisis management group meetings and 30 resolution colleges. This work has continued and progressed in 2017. The board is in the process of setting binding consolidated MREL requirements for major banking groups in Q4 and Q1 next year. I note here the emphasis on major banking groups for MREL. For less advanced groups, i.e. for banks involved in preparing TRPs and so-called Phase 2 plans, an indicative target based on mechanical application of the MREL delegated regulation, i.e. without the detailed individual assessments and adjustments under the delegated regulation, has been made. The setting of a binding consolidated MREL requirement marks an important milestone in the journey from bailout to bail-in. A total of €147 billion of MREL shortfall has been identified at consolidated level. And as stated in the delegated regulation, banks are required to meet this requirement as soon as possible, with the board setting a maximum transition period of 4 years. Other developments on moving to a BAU environment, including the building up of the Single Resolution Fund, which reached the milestone of €17.4 billion of funds earlier this year. Work continues on the development of a common backstop to further enhance the resilience and capability of the fund should it be needed. And on the resourcing side, the SRB has substantially progressed its staffing and should have around 350 FTEs by the summer and be close to reaching a steady state to efficiently implement its mandate set by the participating member states, the European Parliament and European Commission. And this mandate is to ensure the orderly resolution of failing banks with minimum impact on the real economy, the financial system, and public finances. Turning to the industry, it's also been taking important steps in the past 12 months. The most advanced banks have established or are in the process of establishing dedicated recovery and resolution central teams within their organisations to coordinate the resolution work. Governance and reporting arrangements to the board are being formed. A work programme to address potential impediments, comprising specialist work streams coordinated by the Central Recovery and Resolution Team, are looking at having operational plans on MREL, bail-in execution, loss transfer mechanisms, operational continuity, liquidity and funding and resolution, etc. These work streams are populated from senior resources within finance, treasury, risk, legal, and the front office. On the MREL side, we've also seen some positive developments. In the 11 months year to date, MREL and TLAC eligible senior debt issuance is up 50% on levels from 2016 at close to 90 billion in Western European banks. Similarly, AT1 issuance is up 20% year to date at close to 24 billion. Clearly, these are positive steps with a recognition of much more work to be done in translating a resolution strategy into a credible and feasible plan that can be implemented if necessary. It's worth taking a moment to observe a number of findings so far in the resolution planning process. First and foremost, banks which are well prepared for critical situations will generally be more resilient. This can make the vital difference between entering resolution and possibly avoiding it. A proactive approach to resolution planning provides insights on internal processes, the multitude of legal entities set up in the past, intragroup arrangements, the costs, the capital, the liquidity involved, all linked to the operational continuity module of resolution planning. These provide opportunities to unlock process efficiency gains and reassess the true economic cost and value of activities. Thirdly, banking groups approaching resolution planning through a project management perspective with supporting budget and dedicated resources are realising the benefits of this approach. This enables the heavy lifting of putting the main elements of a resolution framework in place within a defined time frame before transitioning to a BAU process. I will now turn to the SRB's plan for making resolution and a BAU process over the next few years. On Monday, the SRB published on its website its first multi-annual work programme document for the period 2018 to 2020. The SRB sets out an ambitious roadmap for improving the resolvability of the banks under its remit within this 3-year timeframe. It identifies 5 key objectives: completion and refinements of the resolution plans, definition of MREL for all major banks within our remit, reinforcement on crisis preparedness, further operationalisation of the SRF fund, and establishing a lean and efficient organisation. I will focus my remarks on the first 3 objectives linked to resolution planning and crisis preparedness. On completion of resolution plans, in 2018, the SRB will draft and adopt resolution plans for virtually all banking groups under its remit. The only banks not covered by a resolution plan will be those that are subject to structural changes, perhaps such as an M&A. The SRB will move to a twin cycle approach on the timing of resolution plans in 2018. Concretely, this will mean that for banks where a resolution college is not required, resolution planning will begin in January. For banks where a resolution college is needed, i.e. those banks with subsidiaries outside of the banking union, resolution planning will start in September. This will help the drafting resolution plans to be more closely aligned to the supervisory activities of the ECB. The SRB is also adopting a proportionate approach to resolution planning, for which the intensity and scope of resolution planning will differ. In Category A, will be banks with or without resolution colleges for which a fully fledged resolution plan is relevant and necessary, and Category B banks are those which require a tailored approach to resolution planning because of their particular nature. For instance, groups covered by European resolution colleges, banks subject to simplified obligations, or banks for which the SRB is host. For the banks which a fully fledged resolution plan is relevant and necessary, a two-tier or modular approach will be applied. This two-tier system will be based on the degree of prioritization for resolution banks, taking into account, amongst other things, the size and complexity and risks profile of the banks. The distinction applies for banks without resolution colleges where a fully fledged resolution plan is relevant and necessary. It means that the resolution plans, depending on the priority, will reflect the level of policy development until the 2020 resolution planning cycle. In practical terms, it means that non-resolution college banks will be assigned a level of priority, with a high level of priority set. For example, at 75% of banks in 2018, 90% of banks in 2019, and from 2020 resolution planning cycle, the SRB expects that all banks covered by complete resolution plans will apply the most advanced set of policies. While completing resolution plans are a target for the 2020 resolution planning cycle, this modular approach foresees annual iterative improvement, with each step embedding more advanced policies and covering additional areas. This distinction is especially relevant for MREL setting and the identification of substantive impediments to resolvability. The general rule is that for the most complex and riskiest banks have been allocated to the upper category of plans for which resolution planning cycle and meeting the most advanced policies. Turning to MREL, in accordance with the BORD, resolution authorities must set MREL at solo level for each institution and at consolidated level for the EU parent institutions. The SRB has adopted an iterative approach to MREL. In 2016, as I briefly mentioned, most banks covered by a resolution college and a large set of priority banks without a resolution college will be set a consolidated requirement with an appropriate transition period, while banks with lower types of resolution plans would not be subject to a binding requirement. The SRB will continue working on the same approach in the years to come, with the aim of setting the binding MREL at consolidated and solo levels for all banks by 2020. Let me now turn to addressing impediments to resolvability. In 2016-2017, potential impediments were identified and communicated to banks without determining whether these impediments were substantive or not. Before designating an impediment substantive, the SRB will, while continuing to finalise and enhance its set of standards, assess whether the actions taken by the bank is sufficient to avoid starting a formal procedure based on the current preliminary set of standards. Following the modular approach that I mentioned earlier, and depending on the level of detail of the different types of plans, measures to remove impediments, if needed, are intended to be taken from 2019 onwards. However, if substantive impediments are clearly observed and resolution is considered, action will be taken before 2019. Nonetheless, banks are encouraged to deliver solutions that will remedy potential impediments to avoid starting the formal procedure. Now moving on to resolution framework and policy. The SRB will develop a common policies and standards in 15 defined areas. These 15 policy areas are identified in the multi-year plan, and I will not go through each one of them individually this morning. However, I will mention some of the policy areas of focus. The development of solo and internal MREL policy to support the operationalisation of the bail-in strategy, including further work on no creditor worse off at the solo level, loss upstreaming and capital downstreaming, eligibility of MREL instruments linked to subordination, and MREL calibration under transfer strategies, management information systems and resolution reporting and data needs and resolution, the operationalisation of other resolution tools such as the sale of business, asset separation and bridge institutions, strategic business analysis including critical functions and separability analysis, liquidity needs in resolution, and access to FMIs and policy concerning liquidity. I'm now going to move on to the final area, but I have left the part of my speech on the table. So excuse me for that. The final area I'll briefly mention is the third objective on crisis management. As you will know, the SRB had its first resolution case earlier this year with Banco Popular. The board also took decisions regarding two smaller banks, one failing or likely to fail, and decided resolution was not in the public interest. The SRB will focus on the implementation in 2018 of a previously defined roadmap that establishes optimal crisis processes and workflows and will entail significant IT development. It will also embark on an evaluation project concentrating on building a common framework for evaluation and resolution. Based on a first report of this framework, the SRB will test the application, performing a dry run on two types of banks, a GSIB and a medium-sized bank. And linked to the policy work will also be undertaken on data collection and information necessary to adopt effective resolution schemes and communication in crisis. In conclusion, much has been done since the SRB full mandate became effective less than 2 years ago. A roadmap for the next 3 years has just been published, and it's clear that while we've identified preferred resolution strategies, the next few years will be intense as these policies are finalised and implemented, and working alongside the banks to ensure that they are resolvable through credible and feasible resolution plans that can be implemented if necessary. Thank you.